I think when we met in February, as Nick said, we had a new Police and Crime Commissioner. For me, the Police and Crime panel had started to go live. We'd been in shadow session for some time, but the Police and Crime panel was coming together. A lot of the community safety partnerships were talking about the brave new world and how life would be under a Police and Crime Commissioner and the Police and Crime panel. Safer Essex, which is really in a sort of amalgam of all the community safety partnerships, was looking at what it had been doing in the past, what it should be doing in the future, and trying to work out where it stood within the new landscape. And at the same time, regardless of the structures, as we all know, there's a number of issues both locally and across Essex which need addressing, and at the same time there's an awful lot of good work which goes on across the Essex communities. We started to, within the Safer Essex remit, started to think about, in the new space, what was the role of Safer Essex? And we concluded after a while that we needed to actually focus on three particular issues. And those were around gathering and using research and intelligence. One thing I think we are good at, we're good at doing, but I'm not sure we're good at looking at some of the information that exists out there and at the same time learning from that information. We also work with the Police and Crime Commissioner on something I call strategic assurance and expertise around community safety issues, and a number of people who were on Safer Essex helped the Police and Crime Commissioner within the commissioning process and to look at the various submissions that came in terms of the relative priorities across the county. And the third area we thought Safer Essex should focus upon is this question of learning and disseminating that learning and ensuring that best practice, where best practice existed, actually rolled out across the various parts of Essex. So 1 year on, where do I think we sit? What we've done under the research and intelligence guise is we've now established a research network. I think there's a lot more discussion in communication about ideas, data, and work in progress. We agreed earlier in the year to the format around what are called the Community Safety Partnership Strategic Assessments, and those assessments are now coming forward and being looked at. They were looked at the last Safer Essex meeting, and the priorities coming out of that will feed through to the Police and Crime Commissioner, and he'll look at those within his new Police and Crime plan. And we've started to look particularly at local adult offending data and looking at trends, predictions, and possible impact of actions. We're now looking at the priorities and themes for next year and how we actually take strategic assessments forward. And we've also got a plug here for a conference coming up, I believe it's next week, on the 6th of December, with UCL. We've got a UCL research conference. Nick is opening that. He's extremely busy at the moment, looking at current crime pictures and information. If we look at what we've done on, if you like, the strategic agenda, and looking at coordination across Essex, across the various partnerships, we actually looked at the terms of reference of Safer Essex. We've revised those terms of reference, we've changed the membership, and I think we've certainly increased the membership to include representatives from the voluntary sector and the health community in the form of the clinical commissioning groups. We've also, in fact, I think established a really, really good working relationship with the Commissioner's Office. And as I said, we've also provided a pool of expertise to advise the Commissioner's Office and others on particular community safety issues and the funding bids that have been made. I think there's still a lot of work we need to do around community budgeting and some of the key issues around community budgeting in terms of domestic violence and reoffending. At the present time, we're certainly occupied by some of the changes that are happening nationally, particularly around probation and how we manage offenders in Essex and who is actually going to be doing what, and looking at the new legislation coming forward in terms of antisocial behaviour and the crime and policing bill. And we've got a group which we've recently set up to look at community triggers and community remedies which will be coming forward. Because there is a danger that different parts of Essex, if we're not careful, could end up with different regimes in place. In terms of learning, it's rather odd, this slide, because it's almost blank, isn't it? And I just wonder whether the statements we've got there actually reflect what is done. But certainly when I go around Essex and talk to various partnerships, it's clear that the dialogue continues, and if anything, it's got much better. And certainly there's a lot more thought being given to looking at best practice and seeing how we can apply things that work in particular localities to the wider Essex community. I suppose one of the elements around this is this conference itself. Certainly Safe Essex for a number of years has been keen on promoting conferences to promote learning and activity across Essex, and it's really, really good that we now have a partnership structure with the voluntary sector, with the Commissioner's Office, and any help and support that we can provide to bring together practitioners across Essex to look at this important area of work. I just want to talk a bit about the themes coming forward from the local community safety partnerships in relation to the latest round of strategic assessments. For those of you that do know about these things or don't know about these things, the community safety partnerships in Essex are charged with preparing their own strategic assessments each year, refreshing those assessments each year, to identify what are the key priorities within their localities in terms of community safety. Now, I've specifically picked on those emerging in Rochford because that's the area I come from, and also Braintree because that's the area that Nicola covers. But it's clear that in many ways some common themes are coming forward, and if you look on the right-hand column there, you'll see the key themes coming forward from the strategic assessments across the community safety partnerships in Essex. Some are common to all, some are specific to areas, and some are a number of partnerships. Burglary dwelling, for example, most partnerships are flagging that. Vehicle crime, half the partnerships are flagging that. What is interesting, as the slide says, is acquisitive crime is gaining in prominence and focus. Now, the importance of these assessments is it informs the local partnerships themselves. It also, we use it as a tool to feed into the Police and Crime Commissioner's Office in terms of the refresh of his plan. And at the same time too, I think it helps the commissioning process and to identify priorities both locally and across Essex. At a time when resources are becoming tighter, it's important we have some clarity around what are the priorities locally and what are the priorities pan-Essex, and whether there are geographical issues we need to address, specific local issues we need to address, or whether there are particular issues that are common to Essex as a whole. I'm now, and in fact, this is my last words now as in the conference, so I'll now hand over to the future, and the future is green.
Okay, my name is Pamela Sandy, I represent the PCC, and one of the themes that I was looking at was victims. So we asked the question in terms of feedback, what needs improving and what hasn't worked well. I'll start with what needs improving. One of the groups said that sometimes it's dependent on postcode lottery in terms of support being provided to, for example, those at high risk. And sometimes it is a question of funding according to the district that victims are living within. Volunteers are heavily reliant on, and again, funding is not always adequate. It was felt that the picture needed to be clearer in terms of who is doing what are the local needs, what funding support is needed and where. The gaps that were looked at as well were things like restorative justice, and a lot of discussion raised with views in terms of making sure that victims' voices were heard in terms of understanding from their perspective what is working well, what needs to be fed through back to the PCC office, and also looking at commissioning and the wider services. Again, what was highlighted throughout the theme was the fact that victims are not reporting crime as much as the police and the PCC would like, and there needs to be a better understanding in terms of the voluntary sector organisations and making sure that there is some sort of recognition for local volunteers. Somebody with one of the groups talked about perhaps endorsing or having some sort of branding behind volunteers that have done well, and having events such as these to reward those good practices. And I was informed by the Deputy PCC this afternoon that that is something that is very much high on the agenda, hopefully looking at spring next year. On a positive, we also talked about what is working well, and getting that sort of feedback and perspective from the partners. And it was felt that the involvement and support from the voluntary sector is very much high on the agenda in terms of making sure that the PCC and the police are able to successfully deliver their objectives and priorities. It was felt that the work from victim support is working very well. Again, the emphasis on volunteers. And it's about sharing at a national level good practice, sharing information, and using things like some of the initiatives that have come through, for example, street pastors and the SOS buses, again, flagging it up, endorsing it, and where possible using the PCC Initiative Fund to support those projects and making sure that it makes a real difference. One of the other things that was flagged up and to leave a note on was the fact that, for example, Rape Crisis is reporting more crime to the police, and as a result of that, it's flagging up that this is an issue, and this is one of the areas that the PCC and the Essex Police are working to try and resolve.
Hi, I'm Jackie Sully. I'm from Rainbow Services in Harlow, and I co-facilitated with Steve, wherever you are, Steve. So if I miss out on anything, can you fill in the blanks? One of the good things in the room was the commitment to partnership. And the good news story was that everyone was committed to the domestic abuse agenda and recognised the need to work together. That was unquestioned within the room. So we were all on the same page as far as commitment was concerned, but we all felt that we were on different pages as far as the solutions were concerned. So I think I'm going to give you some statements that came out of the group, and then I'm going to leave you with some questions. The issue of information share comes up over and over again. The use of Data Protection Act as a barrier around sharing information is something that challenges all of us, and I'm going to do my favourite bit and highlight the 7 golden rules of information share. If you've never seen it, then please Google it and it will pop up to you. And the first, number 1, is the Data Protection Act was not there to be used as a barrier. And it was highlighted that some agencies use this to take a risk-averse approach to something and some situations where we should be sharing important information about clients, perpetrators, programs. Another thing that was in common to both groups was the need for education. Education starting in schools for children at a very, very young age about what's acceptable around behaviours, what's acceptable around relationships, what they should know. But then we saw it as an education programme that went through the whole of society. It didn't just stop as school-aged children. There is a tolerance within society to domestic abuse that shouldn't be there anymore. It's an assault, it is a crime, and yet sometimes there is a degree of tolerance that's just unacceptable within society in today's day and age, shall we say. The issue of men, and I'm sorry to be gender specific, was also highlighted, that it was something, an educational campaign that could be run by men, for men, to actually eliminate the fact that domestic abuse is an acceptable pastime, dare I say, or is an acceptable suite of behaviours that's still okay in today's society. Another thing that was highlighted was the issue of disclosure. Amongst our communities are becoming more and more diverse, and the issue of disclosure amongst some of our minority groups was flagged up as an issue. It's not just as simple as finding someone that you will disclose to, because culturally, within some cultures, that's just not the way that you would go about things, and we need to factor that into the way that we think and approach the whole domestic abuse situation. We need to remember offenders, programs that assist offenders, assist perpetrators, and importantly, offenders have got families. Offenders have also got children. And how do we protect those children and make sure that in time they don't also become victims and perpetrators? One of the big questions was, who has the overview and the coordination role in the domestic abuse scenario? Everyone has got their own approach, their own policy, their own procedure, but who joins up the dots in this scenario? Because no one agency has got the responsibility to do that. And it was felt until someone grabs the ring and leads by example on this, then we will continue to have a disparate approach to this whole subject of domestic abuse. We need to expand our thoughts around domestic abuse. It's not just violent behaviour. The use of coercive and controlling behaviour is equally, forms an equal part into the whole suite of behaviours that add up to domestic abuse. But frequently, the evidence focused on some evidence that related to a violent crime rather than just coercive and controlling behaviour. So we finished up with questions, and I'm going to leave the questions with you because nobody's got the answer. We certainly didn't have the answers within our workshop, but it's food for thought. What does success look like from a victim's perspective and not just an agency one? We all agree that we were suffering sometimes from initiative fatigue, and everyone's got a new initiative or a new approach, but we need to factor in what does success look like for a victim? How would they say that was really easy to access or a successful programme? Are we measuring the right things? We've all got our measurements and our stats and our data collection programmes. Are we all focusing on the same outcomes? Again, that's a question, not an answer. And the third question, which is quite thought-provoking, have we professionalised domestic abuse services to the extent that sometimes common sense has gone out of the window? Do we need more independent advocates, or is the solution agency-based? I've got an opinion, I'm sure you've got an opinion too, but I leave you with those thoughts.
I'm Peter Kay from Essex Youth Offending Service. Just busy jotting down a few notes from the flip charts. What I'm going to say probably doesn't do justice to a lot of the discussion that took place in the two workshops, and what I would say is that they were just too short. There was a lot of engagement, people really busy for the you know, the kind of 30, 35 minutes that they had. And a lot of very kind of detailed discussion has been put onto flip charts, which have been collected in, and they will presumably get sent out at some point, because I mean, that'd be a real shame if any of that was lost. But in terms of picking up the, you know, the kind of headlines from our plenary session at the end of the workshops, a few themes came out. I suppose we're in a situation whereby we do know that it becomes more difficult for local authorities to provide the level of diversionary activities that they would have been able to do 5 or 6 years ago before the kind of economic meltdown. And I suppose there's a kind of feeling that people within their local communities probably do need to think about stepping into the breach. We have got a lot of young people in rural areas around Essex where, you know, probably actually in the good times, there wasn't a huge amount to do. There might have been a youth club that was operating possibly 2 or 3 nights a week. But actually that doesn't fit in the, you know, the kind of 24/7 calendar. Some of that will get filled in by the new Xbox, the PlayStation 4, that my son keeps bending my ear over. But there is an awful lot of people out there, and I know this from the emails that we get in the YOS, that want to work with young people. You know, there's a lot of people coming out of universities actually, where, you know, they've got very good degrees, but they're looking for that opportunity to, you know, to do some real work. There are those people out there, and certainly being involved in the, you know, the kind of initiative bid process where I was part of a group of people, you know, kind of screening those bids and making a level of, you know, what is sometimes subjective judgments really, about whether we would recommend to the PCC that he gives that particular scheme some money or that scheme some money. But there's an awful lot of activity that's taking place. My experience centrally is it's very kind of disparate across the county, and I think probably there's an opportunity there to, you know, to kind of link up very similar schemes across different areas and you know, potentially produce economies of scale and greater efficiency, which, you know, probably isn't something that is necessarily on people's minds, because people are setting up a lot of these schemes for very, very altruistic reasons. So the importance of I suppose, kind of starting to build up or maintain. So I mean, I think that was a real headline message from both of the groups in the workshops about what we can do within our individual communities. You know, the youth service again is going through a period of consultation. So in effect, it's the message getting across that communities probably need to be a bit more self-reliant in terms of creating diversionary activities. Some talk was made of actually some of the very innovative things that have happened that have been driven by young people. So the design of things like skate parks, BMX parks, where young people have been involved in the design of that. And you know, in one case, one example, we're actually involved in the negotiating of the purchase of the equipment, and appear to get a better deal than those people from the council could have got. So that was just, you know, one kind of anecdote really. And again, just in terms of experience, you know, young people quite often do say a place to gather, and things like skate parks and BMX parks are quite obvious choices. There's that advert on at the moment by the guy who designed that park over in Hackney. And I think that's a very kind of powerful advert actually, that just one guy on his own, you know, virtually built his own skate park with a little bit of help, you know, going on the internet, finding out how to do quite difficult and complicated tasks. You know, and that's about the power of one individual really. So, you know, collectively people joining together, you know, there might be potential for doing things like that. I suppose one of the things that again came across was really concentrating on times where we know that there's going to be lots of young people about. Fridays and Saturday nights, traditionally are times where, you know, even when we did have local authorities, with youth services. Quite often, you know, the amount of input on a Friday and Saturday night was actually quite light. It was mentioned earlier, but I mean, I tuned into that programme Bouncers that was based around a couple of bars in Colchester and Clacton. And I've got to say, you know, it was a real eye-opener for me, because the last time I went to Clacton was probably about 15 years ago. I go into Colchester quite often, but not at midnight or 2 o'clock in the morning. And seeing the SOS bus there, you know, kind of collecting some of the human debris after a good night out was, you know, was really quite an eye-opener. But actually, a lot of those young people will be well engaged once they've sobered up with the people who work on those buses. So again, he's finding the right times to engage with young people. You know, in terms of my son, a lot of the music that he listens to, you know, to be perfectly honest, is obscene. And occasionally he'll let me listen to a bit that's not quite as obscene, which is Eminem. I think he's at the less obscene extreme of that thing. It's, you know, I mean, I like to think I'm fairly enlightened, but as you do get older, you know, you've got to realise that young people live in a kind of very different world, but actually their attitudes are pretty much the same as we were when we were their age. Obviously, people talking about families and families that do cause problems, the need to provide as much family support as possible. Within Essex, we've now got under the Troubled Families programmes our family solutions teams that very quickly went from, you know, being set up to almost working at absolute full capacity now. Now, I think certainly what Essex has said back to the Department of Communities and Local Government, we've not got quite as many of those troubled families as you think we have, and I think that's a kind of national message for most local authorities. But there are a lot of troubled families out there. And obviously, again, if there's any kind of help and assistance that can come from the voluntary third sector, that will obviously assist the process and the work that some of the local authority agencies like Family Solutions will be doing. Another key theme really was the lack of role models, you know, and it's not rocket science actually to think that we have a lot of young people where, you know, the dads have gone AWOL many years ago in most cases, or they're involved in very kind of transient relationships where there is a lot of domestic abuse and violence within the home. And it's hardly surprising that these young people, you know, are very difficult and exhibit very kind of difficult behaviours. And again, you know, there will be lots of work that's going out on the ground. I mean, certainly what I'm aware of and have been aware of over the years is things like dads and lads, clubs where dads might take the kids out fishing. That's fine if you've got a dad, but actually if you haven't got one, you know, you have pretty much scuppered in terms of doing something like that. So, you know, again, it's about almost trying to recruit males of a certain age who are almost able to step into that kind of role as a surrogate dad or a positive male role model. And finally, I suppose, just the issue around the amount of young people that we have who are outside of education. In a sense, that potentially has a danger to become even more of a hidden problem, because we've now got academies who pretty much have control over the whole school environment, and it becomes a more and more difficult task, to prevent young people slipping off the radar screen, really, in terms of getting excluded, and then trying to find out where they are and what they're doing from Monday to Friday during those kind of core hours. And obviously, young people who are not engaged in education, quite naturally, they're going to get drawn into antisocial behaviour or criminal behaviour. But as I say, all that stuff that was discussed and put down on the flip charts will not get lost, and it will come out here.
These are all austere times. We're in the public sector, the purse strings are being tightened, we're all struggling. That doesn't mean to say investment stops. In many ways, you could say we have to invest even more. The voluntary sector is the key. The voluntary sector has got capacity, enthusiasm, ability, influence, we in the public sector need to engage with the voluntary sector. I'm delighted so many voluntary sector organisations are here today, including those that didn't get any funding from the New Initiative Fund. Maybe this time next year you will. We need to add capacity, that's absolutely crucial. We can't just carry on and say, oh, we'll have to cut back. That is not the answer. So, the first message to those politicians that are in the audience, when the Commissioner comes to talk about the precept and how much is needed to be presented for the police budget, and we might need to put an extra 2 or 3 pence of the local council tax, then think about this event, think about the services that are provided, think about the value for money that we get. I'll give you one example on the New Initiative Fund. Saffron Walden, I don't think there's anybody here from Uttlesford, lovely little market town in the north of the county, on the borders with Cambridge, one of the nicest places to live in the country, very prosperous, low crime rates. But like every town, they've got an issue with nighttime economy, rowdy behaviour on Friday and Saturday evenings. There's a small group of people that wanted to set up a street pastors group just to deal with that slight area of antisocial behaviour. They got it set up. All they had was a couple of dirty, scabby yellow tabards that they passed on to each other to illustrate that they were street pastors. They didn't have a big business plan. They didn't have key performance targets. They weren't part of some bureaucratic, monstrous machine that we in the public sector are so fond of. They're just a little group of volunteers that wanted to make a difference. They asked for £1,250, which, really without consulting anybody, I just gave them that out of the fund because I thought it was a bit of a punch. When we did the public engagement meeting in Saffron Walden, the lady turned up dressed in a uniform, modelling it to anybody that wanted to see it. You could see the pride that she had in her particularly community project. Other people from Saffron Walden expressed an interest. The synergy of the project grew. Saffron Walden is now a better, safer place. I did some sums and it worked out of the public purse for about £1.50 an hour we get fantastic street safety in the streets of Saffron Walden in the evening. That's what it's about. So when people make decisions about money, bear in mind the value of things, not necessarily just the cost. It's not all about money. Another bid was put forward by Trading Standards, and I think Matthew and Sue are still here. Some of you, particularly from this area, will maybe have followed a case a few months ago where about £2 million was extorted out of vulnerable elderly people by doorstop traders. Try and make you drive, put some tiles on your dodgy roof. Despicable crime. They were eventually caught. Trading Standards wanted to engage in a project to train banking staff to recognise the signs when people come to make large withdrawals, to alert the police so that authorities can actually prevent this heinous crime. I loved the project, but why should the public pay for that? I don't want to put my hand in the Commissioner's fund for that. So Matthew and Sue came in, we had a really positive meeting with the consequence that now we're going to launch a full frontal attack on the big banks at head office level to say it's about time you put your hand in your pocket and funded this initiative. And to be honest, 30,000 for the big banks is a bit like throwing a chip in the Pacific. It wouldn't make any difference to them, but a huge difference to us. So, New Initiative Fund, the clue's in the title. New initiative, start thinking differently, but we still need to make that investment. We can't afford to just say, times are tough, we're not going to put any money in our pocket. Some changes were made to the fund. We've asked for feedback, we got the feedback, thank you for that. The fund is now open permanently. People were unhappy at having to meet tight deadlines, and particularly if a key player is not there to present the case, you felt that disadvantage. We agree with that. So from today I can formally announce the fund is permanently open. There's still about £100,000 left in it. We'll obviously release that money to the right project, but please revisit that, go to the website, get the bids in, and we'll need to take that forward. Also looking forward to the funding for community safety partnerships. We want to bring community safety partnerships closer to the Initiative Fund, so any bids for funding have the support of their particular area, but also to look at how we fund community safety partnerships. The Commissioner still wants to increase the amount of money that CSPs get. Although it's austere times, we need to make an investment. We have a meeting scheduled in Hoffman Way next week to discuss how to move forward. The current process of how the money is distributed has to change because it's not efficient and it's based on historical precedent and people just drop money into an outstretched hand. That has to change. But we are looking to put more money in, but we need to talk to CSPs to find out the best way of setting up a system. So hopefully you're reassured by those things. Lots of other things I could say, but we're very short of time. I want to give you time for questions. I want to make sure we all finish at 3 o'clock. Thank you for your attendance today. I'm already starting to think of the next one and how we can try and make that better still. But I think it's been very successful mainly because of your input, your contribution and your networking during the downtime. Thank you.